She was young, beautiful, and trying to break free. But Olivia Wood never got the chance. The 29-year-old's bags were packed, ready to leave what prosecutors say was a toxic, abusive relationship with her boyfriend, Kieron Goodwin. They say he forced her to take drugs and perform sex acts on camera. But before she could escape, police say Goodwin strangled her to death. I'm Kennedi Walker, and I'll walk you through the disturbing details of what investigators uncovered, how Olivia's final hours unfolded, and who's calling her killer a truly evil individual. For this story, we go to Somerset, England, where a relationship that lasted less than 3 months ended in tragedy. Olivia Wood and Kieron Goodwin appeared happy in photos he posted on Facebook. But behind those filtered moments, prosecutors say the truth was dark and disturbing. Investigators allege Goodwin was controlling and that over the course of their relationship, Olivia transferred more than $7,900 to him. Authorities believe much of that money went towards feeding his cocaine habit. Court documents and messages obtained by the BBC reveal Goodwin allegedly coerced Olivia into taking drugs, performing sex acts on camera, and pressured her into sleeping with another man. The texts also show he was frequently buying cocaine, sometimes daily, and sending Olivia to pick it up. At one point, Olivia called her workplace, telling them she needed time off because of her partner's declining mental health and that he was threatening to die by suicide. But something shifted. Olivia had seemingly made a decision to leave. Prosecutors say her suitcase was packed, ready to walk away, but she never got the chance. On July 30th, 2024, Kieron Goodwin called police claiming Olivia wasn't breathing. She was rushed to the hospital where she later died. An autopsy confirmed Wood had a near-fatal dose of cocaine in her system and had a neck injury consistent with strangulation. Kieron Goodwin was arrested and charged with her murder. According to prosecutors, while he was on the phone with police, Goodwin was also deleting hundreds of photos and videos from his phone. The BBC reports that paramedics noticed a large bruise on Olivia's neck. When asked about it, Goodwin allegedly said, "I've killed her. It's all my fault. Oh my God, is she going to die? What have I done?" Prosecutors presented testimony from several women who claimed to be previous victims of Goodwin. Each of the women described similar patterns. Goodwin would begin relationships by overwhelming them with affection, later disclosing mental health struggles. They testified that he became controlling and used threats of self-harm to manipulate them into staying. According to their statements, Goodwin pressured them to give him money, most of which was spent on cocaine. Some reportedly said he encouraged or forced them to use cocaine, including by injection, despite no prior history of drug abuse. Others testified that he isolated them from family and friends and pressured them to perform sex acts on camera or with other men. All of the women who testified were granted indefinite restraining orders. Goodwin was sentenced at Bristol Crown Court to life in prison with a minimum term of 35 years. Judge Picton described Goodwin as a manipulative, determined, misogynistic, selfish, narcissist, and a truly evil individual. The judge also handed down 3 additional life sentences to be served concurrently for the offenses against the other victims. And joining me to talk more about this is UK attorney Nick Brett. Nick, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks very much for having me.
So let's get right to it. The judge called Goodwin a truly evil individual. What's the significance of the judge using such strong language in sentencing?
Well, I think the problem is that it's an all too familiar tale, isn't it? In this country, of women being killed after short relationships, short but intense relationships of domestic violence. And I think the courts and the judges sitting in the courts having to pass sentence in these kind of cases are rightly, thinking about the public opprobrium.
I want to thank Odoo for sponsoring this news package. Odoo is an incredible all-in-one business management software that provides you with a range of applications. One of my favorite Odoo applications is their sales tool. The Kanban pipeline is a game changer. Whether you're working with leads or full-blown opportunities, you can visually track every stage of your sales process. Just drag and drop to move deals forward. It's fast and honestly kind of satisfying. When it's time to send a quote, it's literally a couple clicks. And the reporting, super clear. You get a live view of your pipeline, conversions, and what's working, so you can focus on closing, not guessing. So right now, you can get a free 15-day trial of Odoo's all-in-one business solution and see how it can make your life easier. Check it out at www.odoo.com/lcnewscrm. Absolutely. And it was short. I mean, less than 3 months. Have you heard of cases like that where, this couple, they seem to be in love, it's so quick, and then it ends in tragedy?
I think that there's an all too familiar and depressing tale. The Crown Prosecution Service and the governments have sought to introduce legislation in recent years, including that of controlling or coercive behaviour, as a means of seeking to, first of all, put a lid on domestic violence being perpetrated, particularly by male partners on their female counterparts, but also to ensure that prosecutors have sufficient weapons to be able to rightly criminalise this kind of behaviour.
And Goodwin was sentenced to multiple life sentences. Is it, normal for a person to get multiple life sentences in a single trial?
Well, it kind of depends on the allegations, and so if obviously there are convictions that are proven, where life sentence is a sentence, then ordinarily what would happen is a judge would impose a life sentence, and then he can impose a second life sentence, but he can do so concurrently. So what that means is the sentences run side by side, and the judge can then mark the criminality appropriately. But when a life sentence is passed in England, the judge will fix a tariff, and what that means is that is a minimum period of time which the person must spend in prison before he's considered for what's called parole, and then the parole board would need to decide whether or not he is suitable for release after that period of time. I think in this case more than, yeah, so it was 35 years so it's a high tariff for this kind of case, certainly.
Right. And I was just about to ask, given that he has to serve the sentences concurrently, will he be eligible for parole?
After 35 years, he'll be eligible for parole. So it will be a massive, so he's 33 now. So when he's 68, the parole board will decide effectively on evidence and having interviewed him and third parties looking into it, and checking his background and the background relating to the offence and what his attitude is to his offending and how he has described that to them, whether or not he any longer presents a danger to the public. If they decide that there is any possibility that he does present a danger to the public, he won't be released. I mean, he could be detained for the rest of his life.
Absolutely. And just if you could explain, how critical was the post-mortem exam in building this case?
Well, I think post-mortem examination is always important in circumstances where somebody has been killed and where there may not, as in this case, be other evidence about what happened because it took place within, the confines of a home. And so, quite often somebody dies in this kind of circumstance. The suspect will come up with some kind of excuse or innocent reason as to why that person died. But a post-mortem examination can obviously show, in particular, blunt trauma injury. So, where there has been injury caused by the use of weapons.
And police claim that during the time that he called authorities, for his girlfriend, at the same time he was allegedly deleting things off of his phone. What's the significance of Goodwin deleting media from his phone before police arrived, and could that be considered tampering with evidence?
Well, I mean, media messaging is very significant in all criminal investigations these days. Certainly in England, the police will always seize phones, even in the most minor investigations, because it often contains not only media messaging, which is in itself can be very important evidence, but often an ability to track movement. And these days, investigative techniques or relation to forensic examination of telephones is pretty advanced. And so even if you're deleting stuff, that can be picked up. And if you're deleting material, then obviously you are going to be subjected to cross-examination as to the reason why you would be deleting material, and that would be something that's put to you as being a means of potentially suggesting your guilt. It is an offence in itself to destroy or conceal evidence relating to criminal investigation. It's slightly unusual in a case like this where there are other serious allegations being brought to include that kind of thing on the indictment, unless it's particularly significant to the investigation.
Prosecutors accused the defendant of psychological abuse and had his, former partners take the stand. How important was this, and how strong was their testimony?
Well, quite often in cases of this nature, the prosecution will apply to reduce what is called bad character evidence. And bad character evidence is evidence which is not necessarily probative of the crimes which are before the court, and that is the ordinary test. So is it relevant and probative for the crimes before the court, but is more about propensity. And so what they really need to do is to get it through a particular gateway that suggests that the defendant has acted in a similar way previously, and that in itself is important, what we call important explanatory evidence for a jury to determine whether or not he's guilty of the offence. And so a judge will make that decision as to whether that kind of evidence ought to be admitted in advance of the trial. And ordinarily lawyers for the defendant will be opposing such applications, sometimes successfully and sometimes unsuccessfully, rather depending on the individual facts of the case.
So here it kind of, it definitely, in my opinion, after just reading the case and reading the documents, it really helped this case because it was able to show a pattern of behavior that the suspect had.
I think that's right. I mean, I think that previous partners were able to testify of similar, what they, I think, described as intensive love bombing, which the kind of evidence that I think is often seen with respect to defendants charged with this kind of criminality. So there's that intense period of love that then turns into an intense period of control, and that control can then often lead to violence and unfortunately in cases like this one, fatal consequences.
What laws apply when someone is coerced into performing sex acts and to take drugs? Because that's what the former partners said that the suspect did several times to them.
Well, if somebody is coerced into any form of sexual act without their consent, then that would, if it involved intercourse, would be an allegation of rape. If it didn't involve intercourse, would most likely to be an allegation of what we call sexual assault. Both those are offences under the Sexual Offences Act 2003. There is, as I just referred to earlier on, I think, a newish offence called controlling or coercive behaviour, which was introduced in this country in 2021. And that can include instance of violence. It can include sexual crimes, within the family home, and it can include often financial control. And so the idea being that it is a crime to treat your partner in a way that prevents them from being able to go about their ordinary life free from control.
Could it also have been considered sex trafficking based on what's been described, or not really?
Well, there are a lot of instances of sex trafficking. I'm not clear that this case was a sex trafficking case. But sex trafficking is often raised in, I suppose, circumstances where you get men who behave in a controlling way, and perhaps where there's more than one female complainant.
His exes also said that he reportedly threatened suicide. Are threats of suicide considered criminal coercion?
I think in conjunction with other evidence, that kind of thing. I mean, it goes back to the same sort of thing that we were saying earlier about the sort of personality, sort of personality type that tends to be associated with crimes of this nature. And I think that, that sort of threat, "Oh, I'm going to harm myself," is a type of control, isn't it? It's a type of emotional control. So it's a means of emotionally coercing someone. So certainly that kind of threat could be used as part of a case alleging controlling and coercive behaviour, in conjunction probably with other evidence.
And the suspect, he allegedly had a drug habit. They said his former partner said that he forced them to take or abuse cocaine. The victim also had a lethal amount of cocaine in her system as well. Was Goodwin's alleged drug habit used in his defense?
I don't think it would be a defence. I mean, it's possible that his lawyers would have considered it necessary for him to give evidence about his drug use in the event that, in the event that it could be raised, I suppose, as some sort of means of negating the necessary intent that one would have to have, or the prosecution would have to prove in a case of murder. But I mean, the use of drugs voluntarily, narcotic drugs voluntarily, not usually evidence which is particularly persuasive unless it's backed up with science.
So are you saying that courts don't usually handle addiction as a mitigating or aggravating factor?
It would. It is a mitigation factor in circumstances where somebody pleaded guilty, usually to acquisitive kind of crime. So I'm addicted to heroin, and I'm on my fourth burglary charge. Then sometimes a court will take the view that perhaps the most appropriate way of dealing with a defendant is to impose some kind of rehabilitative requirement that the defendant attend some kind of drug course, or to assist with their addiction. In this kind of case, the outcome on conviction, I think, is inevitable, really.
What can this case teach us about coercive control laws?
Well, it can teach us that the government was correct to introduce and continue to introduce legislation which assists prosecutors to bring those to justice who are behaving in such a way in domestic situations, and that lots of victims, I mean, unfortunately, this is an all too familiar tale in Britain of women losing their lives because of controlling men who can't handle either the rejection of their relationship or the loss of control. And I think it's important that prosecutors have every weapon available to them to ensure, even in cases which are not fatal, as this one sadly was, that people are brought to justice and punished appropriately.
Well, thank you for bringing that up, because if you could explain, just how common are cases involving both domestic abuse and fatal violence? And for anyone who is going through that right now, what advice do you have for them?
Well, in this, I mean, the situation is so bad that there are specialist domestic violence courts in England. I assume you probably have a similar situation in the United States. And so, yeah, I think it's very important that, there are helplines available to those who are victims of domestic violence, and there are support networks that are set up no, not just the police, but other agencies that work with the police, social services, and other specialist agencies to assist people who are the victim of domestic violence. The most important thing is that those people seek help, and they seek help quickly, and they're able to be given shelter.
Could this case set any kind of legal precedent?
I mean, I haven't. I couldn't. I mean, this case being a first instance criminal trial, it would be difficult to set precedents. It's possible and probable that there will be some form of appeal, as there often is in cases where life sentences are imposed, and it is possible that a point of law had arisen during the trial would then be litigated upon in the Court of Appeal, and that the precedent could arise as a result of a point of law. As I say, this is not an uncommon situation, unfortunately, in this country, and certainly the sentence imposed, one would hope, has the appropriate deterrent outcome that would set a precedent in that way.
Absolutely. And by the judge calling him a truly evil individual, it appears as if, he was really showing him that this is not something that they're going to be putting up with in England as well. So, Nick, thank you so much for joining me today. This is a story that we will be following. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed.
In a victim impact statement, Olivia's mom, Astrid Wood, described Olivia as her sunshine, her love, and her heart. For Law and Crime, I'm Kennedi Walker.